guys, this is Dr. Hub. Today we look at the concepts in the hypothesis testing. So concepts in case of the hypothesis testing. So to begin with, there is something known as a probability value. So there is a probability value. So probability value is nothing but the p-value. So here there is a probable value is a probability of an outcome given hypothesis. So the probability value is a probability of an outcome given the hypothesis. So it is not probability of the hypothesis given the outcome. Although the probability of the given hypothesis is not ignored. So it is not the probability of the hypothesis given the outcome is not the probability of the hypothesis, not the probability of the hypothesis given the outcome, although the probability of the given hypothesis is not ignored. And if the probability of an outcome is sufficiently low, so in case the probability of the outcome is low, we have evidence that the hypothesis is false. So it is also known as a p-value. It is also known as a p-value. Now let's look at the null hypothesis. So in terms of null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis. So this is nothing but an hypothesis that an apparent effect or the outcome is only due to the chance or is a null hypothesis. So the hypothesis that an apparent effect or the outcome is the only due to the chance in the null hypothesis, only due to chance in null hypothesis. So the null hypothesis is one where there is no difference between the specified sample and the population. So here there is no difference between the sample and the population, and any observed difference is due to the change, chance or some other error. So in case of any there is observed difference, it is due to the chance or some other error. So it is due to the chance or some other error. So null hypothesis is represented as H0, and if null hypothesis is rejected, so in case it is rejected as false, then there is an alternative or experimental hypothesis. There is an alternative or experimental hypothesis. So this is nothing but HA, and it is logically accepted. Logically, it is accepted. Next, we will go on to the criteria or the significance level. There is a criterion or the significance level. So criterion of the significance level is nothing but the alpha, and this is if the probability value of an outcome is sufficiently low. So the probability value of an outcome, this is a sufficiently low, so then the null hypothesis is rejected. So the null hypothesis in such case is rejected. So the point below with which we define the probability value as being low enough to reject the null hypothesis is called the criterion. So criterion is a point below which we would define the probability value as being low enough to reject the null hypothesis. Point below which we would define the probability value, and this will be low enough to reject the null hypothesis. This is low enough to reject the null hypothesis. Next, This is known as, we saw, it is known as a criterion. So this was nothing but the criterion or the significance level or the alpha level. So when the null hypothesis is rejected, the effect of the outcome is said to be the statistically significant. So in case the null hypothesis is rejected, so we reject the null hypothesis, in such case the effect and the outcome is said to be statistically significant. So the effect and the outcome, they are to be statistically significant. So by convention, but not as always, the level of alpha is 0.05. So level of alpha is 0.05, that is the probability of an outcome is less than or equal to 0.05. So here nothing but the p-value is less than or equal to 0.05. The null hypothesis is rejected. In such case, the null hypothesis is rejected. So in case the value becomes greater than 0.05. So if the value is greater than 0.05, and in such cases the null hypothesis is accepted. The null hypothesis, this is accepted. So although by convention the level of alpha is 0.05, it can be lower but cannot be any higher. So it can be lower but cannot be higher. It cannot be higher. Now let's look at the type 1 error. So type 1 error. So the interpretation of the p-value is always, it is a p-value is less than or equal to 0.05. It is an investigator can be, is that an investigator, they can be 95% sure, they are 95% sure that the result was not obtained by chance, is not obtained by chance. And it also means that the 5% probability that the result was obtained by chance. So 5% you can tell it is by chance, and from this we can deduce that the null hypothesis might be indeed be true even if though rejected. So a null hypothesis, it may also be, it can be true even though it's rejected. Even though rejected, it may be true. This is what we can understand for this. So this is a type 1 error, that is when an alternative hypothesis is accepted. So when alternative hypothesis is accepted, so even when there is false, and the null hypothesis is true, the null hypothesis is true, and the type 1 error or false positive error. So this is, it is a type 1 error. So when an alternative hypothesis is accepted even when it is false. So alternative hypothesis is accepted even when it is false, and the null hypothesis is true. So this is nothing but the type 1 error, or it is also known as a false positive error. So let's, in case of, it is also called as alpha. So there is an alpha error. So alpha error is related to the criterion A, criterion alpha. The lower the alpha level, the lower the rate of type 1 error. So lower the alpha level, it indicates that the lower the rate of type 1 error. So lower rate of type 1 error is being made. Thus, it can be said that the alpha is the maximum tolerable probability. So alpha is nothing but the max tolerable probability that the type 1 error is being made. So the type 1 error is made, and the p-value is a probability that a significant difference is declared when there is none. And p-value is the probability that a significant difference, so there's a significant difference is declared when there is none. When there is none. Then we move on to the type 2 errors. So type 2 errors. So what does this include? So the error is made by rejecting an alternative hypothesis. So the error is made by reject. So you reject an alternative hypothesis. So reject an alternative hypothesis when it is true. So when it is true, you reject an alternative hypothesis, or failing to reject a null hypothesis when it is false. Or you fail to reject a null hypothesis. This is when it is false. This is known as a type 2 error. So it is also known as the false negative error. It is aka the false negative error. It is aka the false negative error, and more commonly the beta error. It is also known as a beta error. So if the null hypothesis is false, the probability of a type 2 error is beta. So if the null hypothesis is false, so the probability of the type 2 error is beta. The probability of the type 2 error is beta. The power of the statistical test is indicated by 1 minus beta. The power of the statistical test. This is indicated as 1 minus beta. Now let's look at the power of test. So the power of test is the ability of the statistical test to avoid the type 2 error. So it is ability to avoid the type 2 error, and it depends on the ability to detect the false null hypothesis. So it detects the false null hypothesis. So it is equal to 1 minus beta, and which is the probability that a false null hypothesis will be rejected. So false null hypothesis will be rejected. So by convention, a test is required to have a power of 0.8. So by convention, a test is required to have a power of 0.8. The test is supposed to have a power of 0.8, or the beta is said to be 0.2. It is to be acceptable. It is to be acceptable. And this is to say that the study that has less than 80% chance of detecting a false null hypothesis is unacceptable. So in case of less than 80% chance of detecting a false null hypothesis, this is unacceptable. So the type 1 errors, they are easily reduced by reducing the criterion alpha. So the type 1 error is reduced. It is reduced. It is reduced by reducing the criterion alpha. By reducing the criterion alpha. So test power will increase in the following conditions. So test power will increase in the following conditions. So that is in case the alpha increases. If alpha increases, but there will be an increase in the chance of type 1 error. So there will be an increase in chance of the type 1 error. Next is in case the difference between the sample mean and the hypothesized mean is increases. The sample mean and the hypothesized mean, this increases. This is also known as a effect size. It is known as a effect size. Next is, in case if there is a sampling error, decreases. If the sampling error, it decreases. And next is, if the sampling size increases, sample size, it increases, that is N.